Okay, so we're coming to the end of this webinar, and we would like to discuss a couple of potential issues within MySQL replication that you may be facing. One of them definitely is lag. It's a slave lag. This is inevitable part of the MySQL replication. As I said earlier at the beginning, it doesn't really matter whether there's asynchronous or semi-synchronous replication. So you can have a semi-synchronous replication, and this is still doesn't make no. It just does not say that this node will be lagging. It just says that your slave will store event on the persistent storage on disk, and the data will be the write will be flashed. That's about it. So slave can be lagging for like 3 days, can be 3 days behind, or even more. But as long as it's writing relay logs to disk, it is working correctly as a semi-sync slave. Lag can be caused by large number of writes and by the DDLs. With DDLs, we discussed earlier that this is mostly something you can't really avoid, and the only way to make them less impacting is to use PT online schema change or similar tools, which are kind of replication aware and can throttle itself if needed. When talking about lag caused by writes, in this case, multi-threaded slave and GTID is a good choice to minimize the impact. So this is pretty important to keep in mind that those two things kind of work together. I mean, you can deploy GTID replication using GTID and using single thread. That's fine. But if you are thinking about using multi-threaded slave, you want to use GTID also. Theoretically speaking, it's not a requirement, but if you want to do this, this will break at some point, sooner or later. And you really don't, you can't expect multi-threaded replication in MySQL working without GTID. And of course, if you're talking about lag, then hardware has to follow too. So if we are talking about, if your disk's performance, if your IO subsystem performance is a bottleneck, then you can put as many threads as you want, but it won't make any difference. So we are talking here about fast storage. We are talking here about SSDs, about PCI Express flash that will improve the I/O performance. And because the multi-threading helps in terms of the CPU, but it won't fix your disk issues. Data drift is another problem that you will be facing when working with MySQL replication. So, and it may happen even if you take all necessary precautions, because, well, let's face it, bugs exist. Ideally, as I mentioned earlier, you would want to use raw binary log format for the best data consistency between the master and slaves. Again, as I said earlier, this introduces the most severe limitations in terms of the schema compatibility. So you need to keep it in mind. Of course, read-only and super read-only, you want to use those options on slaves to minimize the possibilities of some writes caused by either manual user or some application. Super read-only is available in 5.7. It is also available in Percona 5.6. I believe, at least for the versions that were released in the last year. I don't remember exactly when it was added, but it was a while ago. Of Of course, you can use PT tools, PT table checksum, PT table sync to check the data consistency and, if needed, to fix it. And when in doubt, you can always rebuild a slave from the master or from the backup, and then configure it as a slave. So basically, this is what we did from the cluster control. And finally, when talking about GTID replication, the errand transaction can ruin your day. As I said earlier, this is a significant issue. Basically, the errand transaction is a transaction that is executed, that has been executed on a slave, but not on the master. And this is a problem because with GTID, if a slave is connecting, I mean, if the new slave is being connected to slaving off one of the nodes of the master, it compares the executed GTID on the slave, on itself, and on the master, and it asks for any missing transactions. So let's imagine that you have a master and a slave, and the slave, for some reason, a write happened, right? And then some transaction was executed on it, which wasn't executed on the master. And let's say that 6 months later, the slave becomes a master. So then now every other slave will connect to it, and it will ask for those missing transactions. And of course, it was 6 months earlier, so it does not exist in binary logs, which will break the replication. So you want to keep it, keep an eye on it. Read-only, super read-only can help here, of course, to minimize the chances that someone will write to the slave. GTID subset, GTID subtract functions are also available to help to identify if there is an errand transaction and which GTID it is. In general, if you are planning or if you're running MySQL replication using GTID, and if you are not familiar with errand transactions, I would strongly recommend to take a look at our blog posts where we covered this topic, pretty detailed way, and we also showed how to handle, how to fix this kind of problems. And of course, there are also other resources, other blog posts on the MySQL replication or covering partially MySQL replication. So feel free to, we encourage you to take a look at those blog posts, and hopefully you'll find them useful to your needs. And I think we still have one pool to go, so JJ, back to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Christoph. Yes, and so before we finish up for today's webinar, we wanted to ask all of you one final question, and just get you to participate again for the last couple of minutes. And the question is on just what database versions you currently use. So of course, it's interesting to know when you're looking at replication, which version of those databases you run. Whether for MySQL it's 5.5, 5.6, or 5.7, or whether you use MariaDB, or maybe some other version of those. Thanks for your participation here and for providing your feedback. I'll just give it a couple of seconds. Thank you for participating. I'm just going to close the poll now and share the results. Okay, so it seems like the vast majority of you are on 5.5 or 5.6 for MySQL, and then it's a split between MariaDB and MySQL 5.7 and some other versions as well. Christoph, any comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, first, I would say the for those people who run MySQL 5.5, I think it's a time for planning to upgrade to some new version of the MySQL, because 5.7 is out for a while, and so in the next months, I think a lot of upgrades should be planned. And another thought is that, frankly, I wish we had one more poll asking about GTI replication, because majority of the users, like MySQL 5.6, 5.7, and both MariaDBs, they have the option to use global transaction ID. And I really wonder how many people use it, because it's an amazing feature, and yeah, that's definitely something worth asking at some point.
Great, thanks a lot, Christoph. And so we're just on the hour. I'm going to hide the results here. We're just on the hour, so thank you very much to everyone who participated today. I think there were one or two questions, but we'll answer them via email. That might be more helpful, because they were quite specific questions. So we'll answer you directly via email in response to those. But thank you for your participation today. As you can see here, there are some useful links for related information. And we recorded today's webinar, so we will make the replay available to you within the next couple of days, still this week, and also the slides, so you can go back to the information at your own time. So we'll communicate this out via a blog post. So do follow our blog, and you'll have the information there. But for now, thank you for your participation. We will have another webinar in 3 or 4 weeks, so we'll send out invitations for that. And in the meantime, have a good rest of the week and a good month of February, and we'll be in touch with you shortly. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.